Okay, so we've got our starter graph right here, and we'll put, we'll talk about kind of the impact of changing the tax on savings. I always think this is kind of an important one to talk about. I always teach macro in the spring, and one of the things that people are doing in the spring is their taxes, which I have kind of referenced a few times already this semester. And one of the things that you actually are taxed on is you are taxed on your savings account. So if you think about that, that's kind of insult to injury, because you have all this money in the bank and it's not making very much at, again, 0.01%. And whatever you do make, you have to pay taxes on it. And you pay the same tax on your savings as a percent as you do on your income. So whatever you're taxed at for income, you are taxed at for savings. I don't remember the number on the new tax forms. On the old tax forms, it used to be line 8. It was the amount of savings you had, so you could claim it and get taxed on it. What if the government got rid of that tax? What if they just said, you know what, from now on, anything that you have in your savings account, any interest that you incur, any benefit, completely and totally untaxed. All of a sudden, that makes savings a little bit more lucrative. You might start looking at some of your other investments because all of your investments are taxed through that capital gains tax we mentioned a class or two ago. You might start looking at moving some things around. And maybe you're incentivized to save a little bit more. We actually can show that change in this model, that if people do increase their amount of savings. Now, this is back to one of those models where left and right is how we want to think. So we go down onto the vertical axes down here, and we would say if people had incentive to save more, there would be more funds and more transactions in this market. More pushes our variable to the right. Save more means our savings function goes, and I'm just going to make a nice shift, and shifts to save 2. Maybe you could make an argument for a pivot if you say at 0 interest you would have 0 savings, but I don't think that's true. So you'll notice that my new intersection of savings and investment, I have some new funds too, which sure enough shows more and more transactions. You'll also notice that if the bank is taking in more money, in order for them to make money on it, they have to loan it out. They're not going to make money just by having it sit in their vault. So what they might do is they might go to customers who in the past had qualified for a loan at maybe like 5%, but the customer didn't want to take that. And the bank might call them back and say, hey, we're willing to go 4 now. We'd be willing to make this loan out at 4% because, well, they have this extra money lying around, and 4% is better than 0. So we notice that starts putting downward pressure on this interest rate to fall. So effectively, what do we see here? That if any of our groups have a reason or an incentive or a need or whatever to increase their savings, an increase in savings shifts our savings function to the right. A decrease in savings would shift our savings function to the left. Okay, so we've seen a savings change. What about an investment change? So again, one thing that I always kind of like to try to do is try to get to a realistic kind of example of where we might see this in society. And something that's been in the news a lot in St. Louis over the past year or so, so we have to get past all the coronavirus stuff, but has been what we call TIFs. And I don't know if anyone knows what a TIF is. If you know that, it's an acronym. It stands for Tax Increment Financing. But I don't know if people know what it is, so I thought I would talk about it a little bit just so you can kind of understand when you see this on the news. So it is not uncommon for municipalities or counties or whatever, maybe even states in some regards, to offer businesses some kind of tax discount if they locate a business within your area. And this has actually been getting a lot of attention in the news lately. especially with Walmarts. A lot of communities they kind of really want Walmart because, well, let's face it, hundreds of thousands of people go to Walmart every year, and they would really benefit on having that Walmart near. So it's been pretty common that Walmart has been negotiating TIFs with different communities to be able to build a Walmart. Now, these TIFs typically involve one of two things. Either the county will do some kind of like tax waiver, where they wouldn't have to pay some kind of tax, the county, municipality, whatever, where they wouldn't have to pay some kind of tax or would pay reduced taxes. Or it could mean that the TIF could mean that the county would use taxpayer money to fund part of the building. So either one is kind of an option. And like I said, this has been really, really hot because there's a lot of really small municipalities in St. Louis. For those of you who are from other areas, that's kind of unique. You know, St. Louis, none of us notice that as being different. But if you, for example, go up to Chicago, you have Chicago, which is in Cook County, I think, Cook County. And Cook County as a seat effectively controls all of the districts within the seat, including the city of Chicago. St. Louis City and County don't even utilize one controlled government. And then you have all of these little municipalities in St. Louis County that all have different government. There's very little shared governance and governance in St. Louis, which again, kind of unique. Because of this, now you notice that a lot of communities start competing against each other. And one of the big things that we've seen in the news a lot is this utilization of TIFs for commercial development, again, for things like Walmarts or shopping centers. And because of that, you start getting Walmarts pop up, well, kind of really close to each other based on these TIFs, and eventually put one or the other out of business. So those of you who maybe like live out in West County, like on Manchester, if you live out kind of that area, you'll know that there's a Walmart at the corner of 141 and Manchester Road. There used to be a Walmart literally 1 mile away, not even a 1 mile drive, just to the east on Manchester. But what happened is that rolled cities. That was in Town and Country, and the city of Manchester then went to Walmart and said, hey, we'll give you a TIF if you build a Walmart right here. So Walmart elected to move their facility literally a mile away to take advantage of that tax financing, which really kind of, from a lot of people, made a lot of people fairly angry, because that was, again, it wasn't like it was a brand new system, change in convenience. It was under a 1 mile drive. You can almost see the old location from the new location, but it jumped cities. So one city lost all of the revenue. The other city kind of gave up a lot of tax revenue to get the Walmart. So you had kind of a little upset consumer base for a little bit. We're actually seeing the exact same thing occur right now in St. Anne and Bridgeton. They are kind of fighting each other over a Walmart, to the point where one city has now sued the other city to try to block the increment financing and try to prevent that from happening. So maybe those are some kind of horror stories with it. There's also some kind of good stories with it, so I thought I would talk about one of those. And again, kind of tie it to our St. Louis area. And it has to do with the city of St. Peter's. So for those of you who aren't St. Louis local, St. Peter's is not too far west, maybe a 30-minute drive west on Highway 70 and Highway 64. They both kind of go there from SLU. And if you go back 20, 25 years, maybe 30 years, somewhere in that range, to somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, again, somewhere kind of that range, the city of St. Peter's was not very developed. It had a very small population. It was almost entirely rural, so it was very, had a lot of farms, and it didn't have a lot of, tax base. So the city of St. Peter's actually went to a lot of companies and suggested TIFs. And they offered a very lucrative TIF. They said that if you relocate your business here, we'll give you a 20-year tax waiver. You won't pay any taxes, any local taxes, for 20 years. And the city of St. Peter said they would pay their state taxes for 20 years. You can't do anything with federal. There has to be separation, so they can't offer federal pay. But for a lot of companies, that's pretty good incentive. No local or state taxes for 20 years. So a lot of companies actually started moving out there. Of course, you had kind of your shopping center kind of areas, but then you started seeing companies like MasterCard put up a facility just outside of St. Peter's. And you started seeing a lot of other research businesses come out there. You started seeing a lot of companies locate out there. And so why on earth would St. Peter's do this? Well, there's been numerous studies that have shown that people really, really, really like being kind of close to where they work. Maybe not walking distance close, you don't like getting called in all the time, but under a 20-minute drive close. So as all of these businesses were locating and moving out to the St. Peter's area, we started seeing houses and subdivisions just spring up like crazy because people were relocating to be near their place of employment. And St. Peter's, again, if you go pull up like maybe the 1980 census, went from a population that was really, really, really small to a population that today is over 60,000. For 2 years in a row, St. Peter's was the fastest growing city in the entire country. It was replaced by the city immediately west who saw what St. Peter's was doing, O'Fallon. And O'Fallon started offering the same programs. Actually, that's where the MasterCard plant is. They're in O'Fallon. They started offering the same programs, and they started seeing the same results. And so again, you might say, was this beneficial for those cities? Actually, yeah, because while they weren't collecting and they were even paying the tax portions for these companies, they saw their number of residents go from in the low thousands to, again, St. Peter's is around 60,000, O'Fallon is now around 60,000 people. And all of those people pay real estate taxes, which are local. They pay, a county tax, a school tax. They had all of these local taxes from individuals coming in. So it was actually very lucrative for the city. The next city west did it as well. And you started seeing, St. Peter's for 2 years was the fastest growing city in America. Then O'Fallon was. Lake St. Louis made the list. And I think about 6 or so years later, even Wentzville made the list. So you had all of these cities just kind of going in a line west on Highway 70, all experiencing massive growth. And St. Charles County, over a 10-year period, went from a county that was primarily rural, primarily farm-based, with just a little strip of kind of business right on the St. Louis and St. Charles County border, to now one of the most populous counties in the entire state. It has a county population that is somewhere around, I think, 400,000 or something like that. So it really experienced rapid growth, and they credit a lot of that to that TIF financing done by some of those cities. So there are good stories and bad stories, and every side in between to these TIFs. So sorry, that was kind of a little bit of an off topic, but again, something I kind of think it's important to know and understand and kind of just know about how society works, so that way when you see this on the news, you can understand it. So I'm going to set up my basic market here. And then I'm going to let my story play out. So, right, we had our interaction, F1, R1, and then TIFs are offered, which means counties need to relocate, businesses need to relocate, and, it's not, free to do. They're going to have to go and take out a loan if they want to engage in any kind of relocation or purchasing of new capital, which means they require more investment. Again, think about it in the term demand. They demand funds for investing. So we expect more funds to be transacted. It's the demand for investment. More goes to the right. I'm going to take my investment function and move it to the right. Sure enough, at my new equilibrium, more funds are transacted. You'll also notice that it starts to put pressure on the interest rate to rise. If more companies are going to be competing for these loans, banks only have so much. So they have to start kind of ticking up that interest rate to see who's going to be, who's willing to pay a little bit more. It also incentivizes savers, so it moves them along their savings function to maybe contribute a little bit more to the bank so they can make those loans. So again, you can kind of see a little quick look at investment. If more funds are invested, if more funds are needed, our investment function shifts to the right. If if less funds are needed from firms, investment shifts to the left. And again, firms are our shifter in this model. Okay.
And it went like